Salut tout le monde. Hey everybody. Hey, that turned out to be pretty fun. And I think we all have to admit nobody was expecting the Montreal Canadiens to come back and rally there. So we have a great guest tonight. I already brought him in right now, but Prashanth, who does some of the best work with data analysis, obviously worked with Winged Wheels podcast and Wheeling in Motown and also The Athletic, so he's a former colleague of mine. Before we get going, though, I just want to say hi to everybody in the chat, and I appreciate you guys so much for being here. Salut Alexandre, hi Kay, hi Melissa, hi Trizak, and of course, hi Claire, how's it going? So we're going to talk about all things Habs. You know what? I'll admit I was getting a little cranky today while watching the game, like a baby who didn't get his diaper changed. I was getting annoyed, but we're going to listen to what Prashanth has to say because I think he has a bit of a fresher view on the Montreal Canadiens. And given that the Detroit Red Wings haven't been in the playoffs for 8 years now, Prashanth?
8 years.
Oh boy. Okay, yeah. So he knows a thing or two about rebuilds. Okay, you heard that he had that one ready. So if you could like this stream and subscribe, that would also be much appreciated. And hi Tyler. Hi from Detroit. Hi from Motown. So we're going to get going right now. Hey, listen, Prashanth, I'll tell you, I was upset for the first time in a long time. I was thinking of Martin St. Louis does a terrible job preparing his teams. This is a team that allowed the first goal 5 games in a row, 18 out of the last 20 or something like that. But the other side of it is he's a great motivator. And when the chips are down, which they are often, we see these type of rallies. So can I get your perspective on the game tonight?
Yeah, I think the way the first period started was actually a little bit of a shock for me too, because just like Montreal, Detroit's a team that doesn't start particularly fast. There was a stretch earlier in the season where they had given up the first goal. I think it was like in 8 or 9 consecutive games. They tend to have that be their lowest scoring period, and sort of walk out of that period with 3 goals from the Wings. It was a very different feeling for me. But at the crux of it, I didn't necessarily feel like it was a poorly played period by either team. I didn't think there was a whole lot of chances that really happened one way or another in that first period. But really over the second and the third, what I thought was very interesting was as the Wings relaxed their forecheck and as they stopped applying pressure to the Montreal defensemen, Montreal started to really fly in transition. And I think Canadiens fans are probably very, very familiar that Montreal's a team that plays a little bit of a run and gun style where they try to get their chances, but they also give up a lot. They give up a lot of scoring chances off the rush. But I thought what happened tonight was very interesting in sort of midway through the second, where Detroit really stopped applying the forecheck deep in Montreal's zone, and it allowed Montreal to start attacking quickly in transition, and all of a sudden chances were stacking against the Wings, and really Montreal had a lot of opportunities to potentially even win that game in regulation. I thought Ville Husso had to make a couple of tremendous saves, including right after Montreal tied the game, the giveaway to Nick Suzuki right there in the slot. I mean, that could have been 5-4 immediately. So, overall, I was quite impressed with Montreal's speed through the neutral zone and kind of taking what the Wings were giving to them, particularly as the game progressed.
You can't, my main takeaway from all this is that you can't stop Yoel Armia. You can only hope to contain him to a certain extent, right? So that's 2 games in a row that Armia has scored a pretty nice goal, and it was concerning because the first 30 minutes of the game he was their best player, got that promotion. But as Kay mentions in the chat, Allen had a bad first 30 minutes and a good last 30 minutes. Well, I feel like that's true, and that's also, it correlates perfectly with the whole team having a bad start. And again, I really think that's a Martin St. Louis thing, but as Prashanth mentions, they did rally late, and for a young team that's rebuilding, like these type of games, even if it's a 5-4 loss, in my opinion, does, and I'm going to use that C word, gives character, okay? And down the road, these are the type of lessons you realize you have to start quick. You have to put Yoel Armia on the top line, and you have to hopefully score a power play goal. So I guess if we go after every little detail, it could be seen as a rough game. But overall, and you know this quite well, Prashanth, these are the type of games through a rebuild that aren't seen as that bad from the coaching staff, right?
Yeah, these are the types of games where when you're in the midst of a rebuild, and I say this as someone who has watched a historically awful team in 2019-2020, a Detroit Red Wings team that would have challenged for the second worst goal differential in the history of the league had it been a full season.
Was it that bad?
Oh, it was that bad.
Oh, wow.
It was that bad. 2019, 2020, thankfully it wasn't a full season and I didn't have to finish it out because it was that bad. And really what you're looking for in those types of seasons, not saying that Montreal's anywhere near the talent of that team was, that Montreal's far better than they were.
Mm-hmm.
You're looking for games that are competitive. You're looking for resiliency. You're looking for the ability to capitalize on what's being given to you. You're looking for growth from your younger players. And I thought you saw a lot of that. This is still a very young Montreal team and even a team that doesn't have all of their pieces, obviously with Kirby Dach not being able to go after the first game. So I thought it was a very encouraging game from a Montreal standpoint that you're able to fight back against a team that's currently in playoff position, against a team that believes they are primed for the playoffs, adding a guy like Patrick Kane and all the offseason additions the Red Wings made. It sort of tells you exactly what they're thinking. But Montreal being able to fight back is exactly what you want to see in kind of a rebuilding team.
Are you, because we have some Detroit fans here, are you, listen, I understand what Steve Yzerman's doing, especially in a city like Detroit. You can't go on losing for too long, right? Like there's a point of diminishing returns with your draft. But it does feel like the Red Wings kind of pushed pause on the rebuild. Whether they would have had a chance or not, it was happening, this year, obviously with Compher and then the Brinkat, which was a great move. Do you feel like it was a little hasty on Yzerman's part, or do you think this is sustainable as something they can build into becoming a contender?
That's a terrific question. And I think the traditional view of how to rebuild a team, at least in recent years, has been you've got to do it through the draft. You can't spend a lot of money in free agency because you end up overpaying. And then trades don't often materialize in a fashion, or at least
unless you're Vegas. Unless you're Vegas,
right.
then
you're Vegas,
then Ottawa just hands you
your own luck, right? Because it's Vegas, you make your own luck and you get those deals to work out. But in the case of Detroit, their days of being at the very bottom of the league were done. They, just by natural kind of variance, they were no longer going to be a contender to be the worst in the league.
They weren't bad enough.
Okay. Right. They were bad enough. And unfortunately for Detroit, and fortunately for Montreal in a sense, Detroit never had any lottery luck. Detroit didn't win the lottery at any point in time. Even that 2019-2020 year when they were historically awful, they picked fourth. And that ended up being Lucas Raymond, which worked out very nicely for them. But they picked fourth that draft. And so what I think the mindset ended up being was, look, we're not getting draft luck. We're not getting lottery luck.
Switch it up.
And so either we're going to say we're going to have to sell everything off to try and be so bad and then hope the lottery works in our favor with the Connor Bedard draft, with, Macklin, Celebrini, and Cole Yzerman coming up, or Michael Misa next year. It was either you take that trajectory or you say, look, I'm going to steer into free agency. I'm going to steer into trades, and I'm going to hope that the guys I've added thus far through the draft are going to be enough, along with the development of the young guys on the roster already, to be able to get this team into a sustainable contender. That's the gamble that Steve Yzerman's taking right now. I don't know whether it works, but we're seeing big steps from Lucas Raymond. Simon Edmondson is on fire right now in Grand Rapids. Axel Sandin Pellica over in the SHL.
The Red Wings are above the Leafs in the standings as well. I'd like to point that out.
And so, right now, you look at it, the Red Wings have, one of the better teams in the league in terms of points that they've earned on the season. And they've got prospects that are performing at a high level that are not currently on the roster. And that was the gamble Yzerman made. It was, if I can add enough guys where this internal roster gets better, and I have the potential to add more prospects that are playing well, that I've already drafted, maybe I do get there. That was his gamble. It's a different way of building the team than what the traditional kind of perspective has been, but that's the shot he took. And, I'm naturally a skeptic, but thus far, I've got nothing to argue with, because look at where the team is right now.
I think the biggest gamble as well, Prashanth, was that the Atlantic Division it looked like it was going to be just hell this year. And I mean, it still is to a certain extent, but like Buffalo is a city created just to test the limits of fan patience. We know that. The Senators are imploding, so it kind of worked out well in that sense. They're playing well. The rest of the division is struggling. Do you feel like the Montreal Canadiens, with what they have right now, you have some really good pieces, lacks elite talent. Do you think that's a viable option for them to probably shouldn't happen next year, but maybe in a year or two, add a Celebrini or something like that to the lineup, and then say, hey guys, like, if we want to get a ride on the riverboat, we got to go down by the river. So let's make it to the point that we have enough talent? Or do you feel with the talent that's coming up in the next 2-3 years that Habs are better off going full Chicago Blackhawks? Actually, you know what? It's too late for the full Chicago Blackhawks. Which team always does bad and gets bad picks? San Jose recently. So they could go the San Jose route, or they could just start adding. Do you think it's a viable option with guys like Suzuki as your foundation, Montembeault, Caulfield, obviously, Goalie? Is that enough of a core to really build on?
That's a fantastic question. I think if you're thinking about what the two trajectories are, being that traditional tear down, go for the top picks. You do have a couple of good drafts coming up. Macklin Celebrini's been terrific this year.
He's good.
And then Michael Misa coming up in 2025 is going to be another tremendous, player. You obviously have the potential, and with the changes made to the NHL draft lottery, there's definitely a little bit more of an incentivized, maybe reason to chase after that. That being said, even with tonight's loss, getting that 1 point, the Canadiens have a 9-point lead over Chicago and San Jose already.
It's so hard to be the worst in the NHL now. Like, right. It's harder to be the worst than it is to be the best, in the sense that teams just have no shame anymore, right?
That's exactly it. I'm sorry, Montreal, even in the loaded Atlantic Division, you're not catching Chicago and San Jose for worst in the league. And fact of the matter is, potentially if you end up in the bottom 10, you may win a lottery and you may get to go up to first, but that's not a strategy that you want to bet on. That's not something that I think fundamentally makes a lot of sense for the Canadiens, particularly when you've got some pieces already in the system. They absolutely have a potential D core that's going to look very, very nice. Yep. They've got a potential couple of forwards that I think are going to be are going to be, players, but
not necessarily elite, though. That's the issue, right?
Not necessarily elite, but if you look at Detroit, right, nobody in Detroit, I think you could label as elite.
Seider,
maybe Dylan Larkin. No. Mo Seider is kind of an interesting guy. He looked like he was going to be there as a rookie. I still think he's got that trajectory in him, but he kind of had a setback his sophomore year, and then this year has sort of been up and down for him. So I haven't really seen him go into that vaulted elite, like squarely elite category, but I think there is a way to build a team where the focus is not necessarily on having a couple of elite guys, but it's making sure you don't have weaknesses throughout the lineup.
Yeah.
And I think that was something that we've seen, a number of teams really do. Vegas obviously had Jack Eichel go on a tear last year, but outside of Eichel, it wasn't prime Mark Stone there. It wasn't, a prime Jonathan Marchis. So it's guys that, it's not guys that you would necessarily consider elite, but you would consider them very, very good. And I think Montreal has a potential to potentially, create a team that is a lot of very good guys.
Yeah.
And so I don't think you need to be adding right now. I think if you're the Canadiens, you sort of see how the lottery works the next 1-2 years, particularly knowing what's coming in 2024 and 2025. But following 2025, you're going to have to make some decisions, because you're going to have to decide, can you end up building a team that's going to be competitive with Nick Suzuki as, the best forward on that team, or are you going to have to start moving on and considering an alternative option? And that's the same decision the Red Wings had to make with, can we build a competitive team around Dylan Larkin, or do we have to tear down and focus on a Lucas Raymond, Mo Seider, Nate Danielson, Marco Casper, Simon Edmondson core? And the same question will end up coming up in Montreal, whether it'll be the Nick Suzuki group, or you'll have to end up focusing, depending on the development of Slavkovsky, if Caulfield continues to be the player that he is, that's where you'll end up having that question is it around those guys plus a Reinbacher, and a Goalie and focusing in that perspective. So I think you probably play your lottery chances for the next 1 to 2 years, not necessarily fully selling out, but just keeping yourself in the bottom 10 to give yourself the chance to move up to 1. And then after that, you've got to have that hard conversation of, can we build around Suzuki, or do we need to start thinking about getting what we can for Suzuki and tearing it all the way back down?
I have 2 comments on that. Number one, I could listen to you talk about hockey all day, because this is honestly just clear and concise. And the question I threw out at you, I pulled a Michael Scott. I took off without a place to land there, and you still answered it perfectly, so much appreciated. And also, if everyone in the chat could go ahead and just give us a like and subscribe, we'd really appreciate it. We do have Trinka is here. Is Trizak here as well? Maybe not, but Trinka was at the game, right? Is that it? Trinka was at the game. Oh, wore a New Hook jersey. Hey, listen, the fun part is with the Montreal Canadiens this year, as Prashanth mentioned at the opening of the show, is that they're still going to give you a good, maybe not against the Kings, but they're going to give you teams a run for their money. And we saw that tonight. We saw the offense jumping into the rush. I have this theory that this summer, the Montreal Canadiens told all their defensemen, you have to jump in the rush a lot more. It's because Martin Saint-Louis also mentioned it several press conferences. But there feels like there's a point of diminishing returns when you force your defenseman to activate. In this case, maybe it's not causation, but there's a strong correlation with the defenseman scoring more and the Habs allowing more odd man rushes. How do you find that balance? Because guys like Jonathan Kovacevic, who I love Jonathan Kovacevic, I don't know if I want him jumping into the play every two or three times the Habs are on the rush. So how do you find that balance? Do you just tell guys like, hey, Goalie, you can go. Jonathan, you stay here? Because Martin Saint-Louis has this free-flowing kind of a hippie-ish approach to hockey. It's great from an offensive standpoint, but defensively, the Habs are struggling. So tell me, what's the number one thing defensemen have to do to defend the rush properly? Let's start with that.
Yeah. I think first and foremost, if you start at the coaching level, I think one of the things I've started to appreciate really over the last couple of years is coaches not necessarily forcing a system, but finding ways to elevate players based on their strengths. Mm-hmm. So it's exactly what you said. Jonathan Kovacevic, he's not going to play a Cale Makar style of game. If you ask him to play a Cale Makar style of game, you're not going to get a very good hockey game. But if you can find the type of game that he can play, and really find a way to kind of deploy him to his strengths and coach him to his strengths, potentially you maximize what you can get out of him. A great example of this, and I'm going to throw it back with a guy that you guys are all too familiar with, in Ben Sherratt. Oh. And so Ben Sherratt is a guy that gets a lot of flack really across the league for the way he plays. But if you fundamentally isolate Ben Sherratt, he's a terrific skater. Yeah. Absolutely terrific skater. But the challenge is exactly what you said, is he struggles with when to pinch, when not to pinch, when to chase, when not to chase, when to go behind the net, when to stay back. This season has really been the first season I've seen him make the best decisions. And I think a lot of it has to do with coaching. And so bringing it back to the Canadiens, when you're talking about your different defensemen, it is giving somebody a green light and it's giving somebody a yellow light. It's giving someone, this is what to look for. But I think a lot of defensemen pinching, and particularly in Martin St. Louis' system, a lot of it is also reliant on forwards understanding what their defensemen are going to do.
Communication is big, yeah.
It's got to be communicated, but it's also got to be predictable, right? The forwards got to know this defenseman's got a green light to go, so I need to be ready to drop back. This defenseman's got a yellow light. This situation doesn't seem like they're going to go. I'm going to go ahead and make the pinch, because you're trying to avoid scenarios where two guys play the same situation and then you end up with the odd man rush against. Because right now, we've seen the data. The Canadiens give up the most scoring chances against on the odd man rush. They give up the most in the league.
By
and
far.
It's often due to those miscommunications where you've got two guys that are not on the same page, and you can question whether or not it's just young hockey players. You can question whether it's the wrong messaging. I don't know what it is not being in that locker room, but I think at the end of the day, you've got to coach players to their strengths. Looking at the Habs defense right now, you don't have a ton of guys that can really be that dynamite offensive pinching type player that maybe Martin St. Louis wants. You've got guys in the prospect pool that can,
yeah,
but they're not there yet. And so until they get there, I don't know that you're going to be ultimately very successful with kind of a free flowing system.
Yeah, I think the biggest criticism for Martin Saint Louis is not that he essentially jumped into a situation where the locker room was unhealthy, so he kind of had to remind these guys why they fell in love with hockey in the first place. You know, trust your skill, trust your talent, have fun out there. But there's a certain point where the rah rah go red type cheering doesn't, can't push you to the next level. And I believe that's the concern for a lot of fans when it comes to Martin Saint Louis. But the other part is, we have to admit, he's growing as well. So, maybe bringing an X and O's guy as an assistant coach would be a great move for them. I'm not saying Martin Saint Louis has to go, but there's clearly deficiencies in the game when it comes to, also, he runs the power play. So everyone that wants Alex Burrows fired, remember that. He runs the lines, which I'll be honest, today they were weird. Just questionable choices that go against their very strong data analysis department, and their preparation has just been awful. So I think in that vein, it can be important to isolate, to insulate your coach as well, right? It's not enough to just insulate guys that maybe aren't good defensively. You need an X's and O's guys on the bench. Let's be honest, right? Prashanth, I know we love new style hockey, free flowing, but when it comes down to it, it's a game of details, isn't it?
Yeah, it's absolutely a game of details. And when you really get a chance to sit down and listen to an NHL coach sort of openly speak about, their system or what goes into their messaging or their coaching. And I've had the opportunity to do this a handful of times with coaches at lower levels, not necessarily NHL coaches, but you get some of this if you ever attend the coaches conference. For example, the Red Wings head coach Derek Lalonde spoke at the coaches conference last year and actually broke down the Red Wings power play.
That's amazing.
You understand the level of detail that goes into
incredible.
that.
It's incredible.
It's okay. If this guy's doing this, this is where you're going. If this is the read, then this is the pass, and this is option 1, 2, 3. It's far more complex than we're picking up on the screen. So you have to have those details in place and really driving that into each of your players' minds so they understand how to make the right reads at the right times, and everybody on the ice, understands it. I think one of the challenges about hockey is the game is so fast, and one decision can absolutely turn, an entire play. And so you really need a 5-man unit that's all thinking the same and therefore acting predictably, if you will, based on the details that are being communicated, because the minute one guy does the wrong thing, that's how the entire system breaks down because the game is so fast. And so that's where those details really come in and making sure everybody understands those.
And there's one last thing I'd like to mention about coaching is I know I went from criticizing St. Louis, now I'm going to defend him, but the life of a coach is hectic as well, right? Okay, so you have all the PR stuff which Martin St. Louis absolutely hates, and I get it. He's not a big fan of the media either in Montreal, but you have all of that. And then let's say, you're jumping on a plane right after a game. You're staying up. Your team is sleeping. You're watching video to prep for the next game from your video coach. You're talking to your assistant coach. You're trying to figure out who's going to start. There's a lot going on and not a lot of time for coaches. So we do have to keep that in mind. Although I'll be honest, I'd like to see Martin St. Louis a little bit of I'd like to see him evolve. But we saw tonight, he put Yoel Armia on the top line. He switched Slavkovsky to have a little more offensive role. So we're starting to see him come out of his shell. But I really think Prashanth, and he's a little confused why they're not as amazing as he was. And it's the same thing as when Thierry Henry tried to coach Montreal, right? The Impact. It was frustrating for him because he's one of the best players of all time, right? But they were not. So same thing when Wayne Gretzky hit it. So I just think he needs some support in that vein. But hey, we'll cross that road when we get there, because for now, it's fine that Martin St. Louis is learning in year 2 or year 3. Hey, Montreal, speaking of the Impact, or no longer the Impact, Montreal MUFC is here, and Jean Small's always here. Salut Jean, j'espère que ça va bien. Trizak asks, will Slavkovsky make at least one power move to the net this season? We'll see. We will see. Hey, I'd like to get your take on this, Prashanth, because the Juraj Slavkovsky development has been confusing, to say the least. There's some bright spots. There's some not so great spots in terms of overall development. There's saying the right thing, but there's doing the wrong thing. Should the guy's still the youngest guy on the roster? He's 19 years old. Should the fact that he's on pace for 20 some points in his second year in the NHL, I mean, regardless of all the small increments, the small improvements, That's not good enough for a first overall pick, is it? I mean, you can disagree.
I mean, historically speaking, it's not.
Yeah.
Historically speaking,
It
we've
was
not
a weak
seen
draft,
first overall
though.
picks do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, we've seen first overall picks, at least in recent years, you know, obviously be a lot more productive earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's certainly been examples where that hasn't been the case. You know, we think back to Nolan Patrick with the Flyers, obviously having, you know, significant challenges. Although going into that draft, I think there was a lot of, you know, questions about how productive really Patrick and Hischier would end up being at the end of their, you know, really at the end of the day. Whereas Slavkovsky, I think there was a lot of excitement given what he did in his kind of D-1 year that really had him, you know, immediately at the top of the draft board, you know, heading into his draft year.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously had a very, very strong season. And so, you know, I think the biggest thing you have to be mindful of, and speaking as someone who has seen plenty of draft prospects get, you know, their development messed up, the messaging has to be consistent throughout the entire organization, from the general manager down to the coach, down to the trainers, down to the skill coaches, whoever's working with that specific player. The player is confident in what they need to work on, what their role is, and ultimately how they're going to be evaluated.
Yeah.
You know, obviously we all want to see Slavkovsky score a lot of points. We want to see him, you know, make those power moves to the net. This guy is a massive winger, right?
Big old
where you would
Clydesdale,
expect to, you know, you're talking about a guy that's got Ovechkin's body, really, right? I mean, he's the same size as Alexander Ovechkin. And you want to see him play with that level of power. That's never really been Slavkovsky's game, though. If you go back and you watch it.
Not even at the Olympics. It's
no. You go back and watch him in the Olympics. You go back and watch him in Liga. That was never the way he played. That you know, he's a very high skill guy that wasn't necessarily a huge power forward, even though he's got the body to do that. And so you've got to find a way to maximize that skill at this next level. It can absolutely be done. There's plenty of guys where they've been able to get, you know, something out of these guys. A guy I like to think about that took a little bit. Now, granted, he wasn't a first overall pick, but ended up playing out really nicely with a similar, you know, frame and overall kind of, I should say, overall abilities. Jason Robertson in Dallas. You know, you look at him; he was a guy who was a second-round pick, and you think about Robertson. He's 6'3", 200 pounds.
Is he that big? Yeah. Okay. I thought he was small. I thought he was like 6'1" or something. Okay. Well, he's a big boy.
Jason Robertson is a big hockey player. He's a guy that ended up taking a little bit in his career to getting started. You know, his second year, he ends up scoring 17 goals, 45 points for Dallas. That's when he started to come in. It was in his COVID year. But it actually took him a couple of years to even get into the league. He didn't break in until 2019, 2020. He was a 2017 draft. Fun fact for Montreal fans, he was drafted right after Gustav Lindstrom in that draft. You know, the Red Wings.
Hey,
Gustav
you mean goal scorer Gustav Lindstrom? 3 goals so far. Have you looked real quick, Prashanth? I don't mean to interrupt. Well, I do. Have you looked at his underline? I think he's at like 24% XGF right now. Is Gustav Lindstrom.
I could have told you that would have happened based on watching him for the last handful of years, but he's
the most handsome player with the ugliest stats that I could
it's always a sticking point for me that he was 38th overall and then 39th overall was Jason Robertson, but I digress. So, you know, I bring all of this up because Jason Robertson was a guy that took 3 years in the league, and that was after it already took him 2 years post-draft to even play in the league to really find his game. So he's a guy where if I'm Montreal, I'm modeling development after Jason Robertson. Slavkovsky's got similar tools, great shot, just like Robinson, good skater. That's the guy you want to be looking at. How did Dallas do this? How did they get that development track working for Robertson? What were the steps taken? And then see if you can craft him into that, because that is what he can be. That's what you ultimately want to see is a Jason Robertson type player out of Uri Slavkovsky.
It's funny because when I was going to a lot more Laval Rocket games, all the Dallas scouts that I spoke to, and they're some of the nicest people, and I kept talking to them and saying, hey, you guys have a lot of talent, but are you getting pressure from? And they were like, yes, absolutely. Right now, we need these guys to all land. We feel like we've done a great job, but so far it's not happening. So it's a good reminder with the Montreal Canadiens. Like if we pull everything apart and we look at the minutiae of it, yes, there's frustrating aspects, but this is hardly the beginning of the middle of the rebuild. I'd say it's maybe the midpoint of the beginning for the Montreal Canadiens. Like another 2 or 3 years is probably what's best. Hi Nathan, how's it going? Nathan's in here and Frederic's here as well. They're complaining about my plain wall. I could put anything up there, but I'm not big on putting crap on my wall. I could just put. I'm just gonna print out a picture of Lyle Odeline and a picture of Yanni Nienema, and then like I don't know. What do you think I should put up on my wall here? I'll get a Lindstrom jersey to match your Lindstrom jersey. How about that? Hey, quick question. Would you disagree if I say he's the best defenseman of all time, even above Bobby Orr? And I hope there's no one watching right now that's going to get very angry about it. But in my opinion, Nick Lidstrom is the best defenseman of all time in the NHL. And I feel it's crazy that we don't mention him.
You know what? I think everybody's got a different definition of best. And my personal opinion is we have to judge best within an era because of how much the game changes.
Good call.
So Bobby Orr was the best of his era. And in Lidstrom's era, I think he was the best of his era. And I'll say that he was better than Bork, Pronger, Niedermeyer, all the guys that were in that bucket. But I sort of prefer to focus on that because particularly in hockey, the game has changed so much.
It's incredible.
Over the last 50 years, the game has, from even just fundamental rule changes to the way the game is played, it's been very, very different. So I don't like to think of greatest of all time.
Smart answer.
Unless you're talking about Dominik Hasek, in which case
no
I will
question.
not hear any other comments, questions, when it comes to that. But otherwise, I really prefer to focus on best of era. In which case I think that's Lidstrom.
And you just avoided angering a bunch of people, unlike me. So that's wiser beyond your years. I will say Dominik Hasek, as a guy who grew up like the player. I really love the player, Patrick Roy. I started watching hockey because of Mats Naslund, and I really fell in love with it because of Patrick Roy. He had that just winning streak. So I will say Dominik Hasek was easily the best goalie of all time, and that includes Roy being dominant in the playoffs, right? So yeah, absolutely, I'm with you on that. Did Patrick Kane play? You know what, Prashanth? I was so focused on the Habs. Kane didn't play tonight, did he?
No, he hasn't made his debut yet.
He's been practicing though.
He's been practicing. The expectation is he'll play likely Tuesday against Buffalo.
Okay. Do you think that'll make by the way, and they love you in the chat, as Jean Small just mentioned, love your insights, Prashanth. Which deity do we have to make offerings to get you on the show after every Habs Wings game? Hey, we'll do it. If he wants, I'll have Prashanth on for absolutely every single Habs game. I'd be happy to do it. If you have any questions, don't forget, we'll throw those in the chat, and we're gonna probably wrap up where we're about 30 minutes. Hey, we're actually doing good. I didn't think we'd have a lot to talk about tonight. But I will say this. When it comes to the Montreal Canadiens and their future, should fans be expecting tangible improvements from an underlying numbers standpoint? And what I mean by that is from last year, they've actually regressed in several key categories. We're talking about expected goals, high danger chances against per 60. It's a little too early probably to get worried about any type of regression in that sense, right? Especially this is really their second year in earnest. So should we be concerned that the numbers underneath, like they're exciting, they're fun, but the foundation is kind of shaky? Should that be a concern in year two?
In my opinion, no, because I think a lot of those numbers fundamentally are systems-based numbers.
Yeah.
And again, if you end up thinking back to, prior years, another team I'd like to give you guys to model or think about is the LA Kings. So the LA Kings are a team that have really executed a very nice rebuild and have very slowly sort of turned that team around to now this season. They're an absolute juggernaut. Mm-hmm. Last year, they were 18th in 5-on-5 expected goals for percentage. They're first this year. They've made a substantial jump because it's the development of those young players. And I think that's what you're really looking to see is as Montreal can develop Slavkovsky, as Caulfield continues to grow into the player he is, as Suzuki continues to be the player that he is, as you add a Lane Hudson, as you add a David Reinbacher, as you add these guys in, you want to see that progression happen. And that's what the Kings have done. Mm-hmm. You've seen a big jump from, Quinton Byfield this year in LA. You've seen Gabe Vilardi over the last couple of years take a tremendous step forward. I mean, they've got guys like Jordan Spence on the back end that have doing,
Brent
tremendous
Clark
things.
is coming. He's not even in the league yet, but he's coming.
Right, right. And so those are things that I've seen about the Kings, and they've been able to really slowly work their way up to being this kind of powerhouse team that they are this year. And I think that's what you're sort of looking for from Montreal. These are systems numbers with a roster that's frankly not going to be able to get you there. But if you can be a team that slowly but surely, makes these incremental improvements year after year, particularly as you add these younger guys in, I think you can be a very, very successful team.
Again, just a phenomenal answer with much more detail than I expected, and I think it's reassuring once in a while to hear it from outside, the Montreal bubble. Kay mentions this about, I'm going to make it worse. Kay mentions Marc Bergevin, of course, she's shaking her hand at the sky like an old man, Simpson style, sets up what we have here, and then fucks off to LA and their winning team. I'm going to make it even worse for you, Kay. Well, at least for people living in Quebec, we paid part of Marc Bergevin's salary this year because the Quebec government decided to give the LA Kings $7 million to play 2 preseason games. So they're going to take a chunk of that and pay him off. So not only did he leave us with all this amazingness, some of his salary is going to be paid out of Canadian taxpayers' money pockets. So I didn't mean to put a more negative spin on it, but it's funny how these things come.
I mean, Mark, if there's a saving grace, and again, I'm all about parallels and looking at examples. Look at what Ken Holland left the Red Wings, and that's where you're at here, because Ken Holland's drafting. We talk about Gustav Lindstrom going right before Jason Robertson. That's a Ken Holland pick, right? Those are the things that led to the Red Wings being where they are right now. Is missing in the 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018 drafts that ultimately lead to the Wings being so far behind. And it's this very similar thing that now Steve Yzerman has had to dig out, and you're hoping that the same can be done in Montreal. It does take a little bit of time to clean up the mess, but afterwards, that's when things can start to get kicked off.
I would argue, and I think Ken Hughes has actually done a great job moving some of those contracts. But Marc Bergevin actually left it. I know some of these contracts are ugly, but overall, compared to other handoffs, when he passed the baton, he left them with all their picks. He actually stockpiled a couple. He left them with all their prospects. He didn't make, yes, he spent money on free agency, and he panicked with the whole Kotkaniemi, Philippe Danault, Joël Bouchard, all leaving in one day, signing Mike Hoffman, trading 2 first-rounders or a first and a second for Christian Dvorak. Not great. But overall, I believe Marc Bergevin, and I know a lot of people won't like hearing this, left the Habs in a pretty good situation considering he had been there for a decade. He didn't, guys like Nick Suzuki and Cole Caulfield all under his reign, right? Guys like Caden Goalie and Jordan Harris, Arbor Jackeye. So as much as I criticize him, and I think he deserves it, you bring up a really good point there. The Habs were handed less garbage than the Detroit Red Wings, but eventually, and it's just like, I understand why Steve Yzerman did it. I hope that Kent Hughes has a long-term plan and doesn't decide that, hey, because we're getting the vibes right now that Prashanth, that they think they're almost ready. They talk about almost making the playoffs this year at the start of the year. They signing Montembeault is a sign that they think they want to have that starter. If you really want it to be worse, you're not going to sign a starter. You trade Montembeault. You keep Jake Allen. So I think the greatest fear right now is that they think they're a lot closer than they are. And, I'm just afraid that they're going to start to take off the emergency brake and start rolling down that hill. So time will tell. That's the other part here. And as you mentioned, there's a lot more positive than negative when you're looking from the outside. So that is great. Don't forget to subscribe, like the chat, and we're going at what? I could listen to Prashanth all day. We're at 40 minutes. That's actually pretty good. Nathan Cunningham asks, why are there no ex-players as refs? You know what I think it is? It's that at the end of their careers, they're broken. They're like, when I spoke to Marc-André Bergeron a couple of years ago, and I asked him, hey, what was the best decision of your life? He said, retiring early. He said, my knees work. None of my buddies' knees work. So being a referee is one of the toughest jobs physically. You're skating more than most of these players, and you got to be in great shape, and you also have to train. So I know what you mean. There are some ex-players, though. I forget who they are, but for the most part, the guys that spend their whole life in the NHL, their bodies are broken at the end. It's sad, but true. If you have any questions for Prashanth, do not forget to throw those in the chat. We're going to get, I know everyone in the chat loves loves him. I'm here too, guys. But yeah, and as Kay mentions, GMs also do this funny thing called lying. That's a great point, because with Kent Hughes, what he says and what he does are two different things, and you really have to pay attention to what he does. And you know, he's been, even with Josh Anderson, he was goosing it a little bit, saying he's getting all these offers. Oh, he's getting offers for Jake Allen, Caden Primo. So absolutely good point, Kay. As per usual, you got to follow the money in this case, not necessarily the mouth. Refs have to skate the whole game, says Strinka. Yeah, exactly. That's it. Dominique mentions Prashanth is my discovery of the week. I want to see him more often. Yeah, it's crazy that we haven't had him on. I think you did one show with Andrew before.
Yeah, I did one last year, and then unfortunately the first Wings Habs game didn't work out because I was actually at the game in Detroit, and so I couldn't get back to my hotel in time to actually record with Andrew.
How dare you? You can I'll throw his Twitter handle in the chat so you can go ahead and follow him. But you do a ton of, what are you working on right now? I know you pulled back a little bit, right, from your hockey coverage?
Yeah, so I don't formally write anymore. Obviously, you know, like you mentioned at the top, I used to write for Winging in Motown, The Athletic.
People, yeah.
I used to host a podcast for The Athletic. I pulled back a lot just because you know, personal work got quite busy. I had a child, and now he's 2, and so that consumes a lot of my time.
He's 2? Aww.
Yeah, he's 2 already. I know, it's crazy.
No sleep for you.
No sleep at all. No sleep at all. That's why I'm up here right now, right? Because it's like, you know, this is my time to actually be awake and not have to be distracted by anything. But you know, right now, a lot of what I focus on is what I consider anything that's interesting from a statistical or kind of way to evaluate teams, players, prospects. You know, I like to do a lot of work with prospect data, particularly. I don't know that we've done enough with kind of comparing and understanding all of these different scouting rankings that are out there in the public space compared to what we see NHL teams do. So this past year, you know, I actually built a website and worked on a project to house all of the different rankings that are out there for prospect sites, and then ultimately build a model to kind of generate and expect like which players would be taken next based on the public rankings, and then seeing actually how closely that compared to what NHL GMs did. And then you end up seeing kind of the various differences, and then understand sort of what do public scouts tend to prefer, what do NHL GMs tend to prefer. And it's a very interesting project. It ultimately resulted in my partner getting hired by the Chicago Blackhawks. So
did he?
That was yeah,
I didn't know.
Got hired by the Blackhawks. So now I've got to restart that one, but wait until
that was, sorry to interrupt. That was the one who I think we hosted one of his articles, right, on Montreal Hockey Now.
Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay, then just boom, hired by the Blackhawks.
Yeah, boom, hired by the Blackhawks. Started in October. So
nice.
Yeah. That's what happens. You already had somebody right for your site that now works in the NHL. So
there you go.
You know, it's but it's crazy. So a lot of what I focus on is just things that I find interesting. You know, and folks are always more than welcome to shoot me ideas. You know, people like Shanna Goldman and Dom Wishizin constantly shoot me ideas, and I try and help them where I can. So always feel free to do that, because it's a lot of fun to just kind of play around with the stuff and see what's interesting.
And sometimes things don't work out, and that's also part of the process. But I feel like your greatest strength is that first of all, there's no arrogance whatsoever. It's concise. It's not contrived discussion, right? It's not making it complicated for the sole purpose of sounding intelligent. We know that you are intelligent. So even when you're dealing with someone like me, you make it simple enough that I can absorb it, but I'm still following along. So I really feel like your delivery and just your grasp of everything, and your cool, calm, and collected demeanor is a huge asset for the data analysis category, especially online and whatnot. You know how tempers can flare, but I'm really, like, I fought in the Fenwick Wars of 2004, and I'm past that now. I'm on my pension, but I think we need good voices, especially to keep supporting the new ideas, whether they're good or not, and you do that absolutely perfectly. So I'd like to thank you, honestly, on there's so much of your work, and others, obviously, as you mentioned, Dom and Shayna, that I've piggybacked on to seem somewhat intelligent. So I do appreciate that. Honestly, it's really important, especially we have to cross that bridge between, yes, data is important, but sports are supposed to be fun. So you really have to, and this is the fun part that we often forget So I feel like you keep that in mind as well, because at the end of the day, that's what we're there for, right? We're there to watch a game, to see the fun. So I honestly, Prashanth, I really appreciate the way you approach everything.
Well, I appreciate that, and I like to bring it back to one of my other passions, which is bourbon and whiskey.
Now you're talking my language. All right, bourbon.
Right. So the same way I say people should enjoy whiskey however they want to drink it, people should enjoy sports however they want to enjoy it. Right? If you want to put an analytical cap on and spend some time slicing data and reviewing it from this perspective, absolutely go for it. If you want to say I'm just here for fun, let me just watch the game.
That's fine too.
That's totally fine too. Yeah. There's not a right way to do this. It's the same way with drinking whiskey. You want to pour your Pappy Van Winkle with Coke? Ooh. Fine, that's your bottle.
No, okay. There has to be limits here, Prashanth. There has to be limits.
I'm just saying, I wouldn't do it, but you enjoy your whiskey how you want to enjoy your whiskey.
Yeah.
Right. The purpose is to have fun. And so it's the same concept with sports, right? The purpose here is to have fun. So I'm going to do it because this is how I find it interesting.
Yeah.
Someone may not find it interesting that way, and that's totally fine. That doesn't bother me.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree with that. And now all I can think about is bourbon. So thank you very much for that. But
don't worry, it's right here. It's right here.
Oh man, see, I'm on the Nick Suzuki drink right now. Have you actually ever heard of someone putting Coke in Pappy Van Winkle? Have you?
I'm sure somebody's done it. I've never seen anybody do that, but I've also only been around a Pappy Van Winkle bottle twice in my life.
I'll say this: I think it's the most overrated. It's delicious, absolutely, and I would literally kill someone for it. But it's actually, when compared to the price, it's not worth it.
Yeah, what people sell it for now, and again with whiskey, right? If you want to pay for it, fine. You go ahead and pay that for it. Mm-hmm. You do what you want to do with it, because as long as you open the bottle, that's all I care about.
I've always long maintained that the only, people talk about who's a good fan, who's a bad fan. The only bad fan is the one that tries to tell others how to enjoy their game, right? So if you want to be,
exactly right.
You want to be sarcastic, that's fine. If you want to, just do you. Just don't try to impose your way, as you mentioned, on others. Okay, I actually lost my chat here. I got so enthralled with the discussion that there I am. Let's go back. Do you think that the Red Wings are locked this year to make the playoffs? Because I'm looking at it, things can change in a hurry, man. Buffalo could finally find their groove, although it's going to be tougher with some of their injuries. Ottawa is too talented to be that bad. Tampa is always that weird team that, they're not good enough to win anymore, but they're going to be in the race. It looks good right now. What's your prediction for the end of the year for the Red Wings?
It's certainly tough to say. I think them missing the playoffs so many years in a row has certainly scarred me and maybe make me a little bit more of a skeptic that I'm not fully believing. I mean, but right now in the East, they're 5th in point percentage.
That's great. How are their underlyings right now? I'm going to go take a look at that.
The underlyings aren't great. And so that's where there's that little bit of hesitancy. I mean, they're about a 48, 49% 5-on-5 expected.
Not the worst. That's honestly
it's not.
You can make the playoffs with 48%. I know it used to not be the case, but it's doable.
Yeah. You can absolutely make the playoffs. The challenge will be, how does the Atlantic Division end up shaking out, right? We all talked about it being this monstrosity at the beginning of the year in the offseason.
Toronto was underwhelming.
We haven't really seen it play out that way.
Toronto's been underwhelming. Tampa Bay's been underwhelming. I don't know.
Boston's starting to regress back to the pack. Yeah. Ottawa and Buffalo don't appear ready to have taken the jump. So, you sort of are seeing that there is an opportunity for a team to step in, and that's what Detroit's really done. They filled the void. But does Tampa with Vasilevsky, does he eventually find his games, not counting the 8 goals he just let in against Dallas today? Oof. Do Buffalo and Ottawa ultimately pick up their game? Ottawa, like you said, is far too talented to be struggling like this. And even Buffalo to a lesser extent. I mean, Buffalo was a handful of points out of the playoffs last year. They are not a 458 points percentage team.
No.
They should be a lot better too. So, as these things end up changing over the course of the year, do we see the Wings start to come back to the pack? I don't know. I don't know. Right now, I think I would call it a coin toss, 50-50. I want to say
they'll take a coin toss.
Yeah, I want to say that the Wings would be in the playoffs. I mean, hell, I'll take 50-50 after the last 8 years. So, give me that right now. But there's a lot of hockey to be played. We're only 23 games into the season.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. It's like finding a Dr. Pepper in the desert. It's the most disgusting drink on earth, but you're going to drink it, okay? Because it's an oasis in that case. I hope you don't like Dr. Pepper. I think it's a crime against humanity. It tastes terrible, but that's just me. Okay, I think we're going to wrap up very shortly. I mean, I could stay here and listen to you all day long, but well, we're running up on an hour. If anyone has any questions in the chat, go ahead. And I'm going to allow Prashanth to answer everything now because I'm enjoying listening to him. And I'm sure you're enjoying listening to him more than me. I'll be back for way too many shows coming up anyhow. Andrew has his parents in town, which is absolutely great. They get to spend time with the kids. And you know what? Andrew works so hard. You know, it's you don't see what's going on behind the scenes, but he's working with just, 20 people that there's issues all the time. And it's just normal issues that arise. And he's been the most patient and nicest boss that and it's difficult too, because we're friends, right? So that's not always doable, but I will say this, Andrew's getting a well-deserved break, and during the Christmas time, I'll be here as well. I like to give him a little bit of time off in the holidays, and that's why I take all the Anaheim 11 p.m. starts. So you're going to be seeing my face. You're going to be seeing my face a little bit, but for now, if you have any questions for Prashanth, throw it in the chat. We have one from Jean Small. Which RFA should the Habs target next? Do you mean, Jean, like their own RFAs, or because do you think we're ever going to see another offer sheet after that whole Aho issue?
I still think you will.
I'd love to.
Because I'll kind of bring this back with a really long answer, and by long I mean broad answer, and I'll narrow it here. Mm-hmm. I think the way hockey teams are constructed moving forward is going to be fundamentally different than what we've seen over the last 15 years.
Oh yeah.
Because and a lot of this has to do with how much the salary cap is going to go up over the next 3 years. The expectation is by as much as $10 million in the next 3 years.
After being flat, so that's going to certainly
open up overspending in free agency, right? And then being able to do these trades. The second thing is the number of changes that have been made to the draft lottery just in the last 10 years has really changed how teams can focus their rebuilds. You can't build a team the same way Edmonton did. You can't build a team the same way the Pittsburgh Penguins did. No. Right? You have to adapt, and you have to be able to do things differently. And really what we're seeing now amongst the top teams is either you have teams like Vegas that have been able to, really leverage their cap space quite well. They've been able to win trades, be able to sign key free agents. They've done a tremendous job. You see a team like Dallas that's been able to draft really well late in the draft with a lot of the players that they've been able to hit. Colorado is one of kind of the last teams that really built their superstars, through the draft. You're not going to have a ton of that moving forward. You're not going to have a lot of repeat lottery winners, particularly with the new rule that the NHL has put in about the amount of times you can win the lottery. So you really can't have another New York Rangers scenario where you're getting Lafreniere and Kakko and whatnot, and then you have Adam Fox forcing his way there. You're going to have to get creative in how you build teams. And so all that being said, an offer sheet is an underutilized tool. And I think as teams have to get creative in how they go about doing this, an offer sheet may become more palatable for some of those teams, or palatable. We'll see.
That's one of the smartest answers I've heard. Yeah, that's. And I'll say this. I think now that we're also seeing GMs move out of the mold of having to be ex-players, we're seeing guys with business degrees get hired. We're seeing guys that have more than a high school education. And I'm not trying to insult anyone else, but I mean, you're in charge of a multi-billion-dollar company, right? So you should have that type of expertise. I think also what happens now that we're getting the non-ex-NHLers, it's a little less of a old boys club. So you're not afraid to screw over your golf partner because you're not golfing with him. You're not his best friend anymore. Whereas a lot of these ex-players, there's a certain code of respect that they had to. Even Marc Bergevin, when he did the Aho offer sheet, which in the long run, it was just his agent playing the Habs against the Canes, right? Hilariously, doing it masterfully. But even he got a lot of crap from other GMs in the league. Like, how dare you? How dare you do this? So I love hearing the idea that they're going to maybe, get out of their comfort zone a little bit. I think it would make it a lot more interesting. And it's guys, it's not necessarily the big names, Prashanth, that I think would be good for offer sheets. The guys that it's going to cost you a third or a second and a third, that type of thing on teams that are, that got silly in silly season and don't have enough cap space. So I really hope you're right, and you usually are, but a more aggressive brand of GM would be fantastic for the NHL. I will say this because Vegas, I know different situation, but their entrance in the NHL was such a breath of fresh air because they're like, fuck it, we're going for it. We're going to go for it every year. I understand they didn't have the baggage, but they showed that if you're aggressive, you can allow teams like Ottawa to develop, draft, pay for everything. And then once the player's ready, it's like, here, I'll take them for, I think they traded Stone for like half a Toblerone bar or something like that.
Yeah.
So you can take advantage of that. And I really hope teams get aggressive. Like, I feel like it's not going to be as aggressive as I want, but yeah, offer sheets would be absolutely fantastic for a little more activity in the NHL. Because one of my favorite tweets is, what was it? The NBA trades 17 superstars in one day, and that the Swamp Rabbits have signed an ECHL player was the most exciting hockey news. So we could use some fun news that isn't necessarily related to terrible events. Would be perfect for hockey. Okay, so yeah, silly season K is what I always call it, but I'm going to say this now. I think teams have done a much better job recently not overspending in free agency. So as Prashanth mentions, that might, once the purse strings are a little looser, that might get bad again, and that makes it more interesting. Would you have paid Goliath, full mentions Montembeault signing, would you have paid $3.15 million for 3 years for Samuel Montembeault? This is a guy he's been top 10 GSAE, but before that he had terrible numbers. Is this a case you think of a guy just taking longer to develop, or is this a guy just really finding his, being in a situation where he faces a lot of shots, so he's always going to save a few more than expected?
It's a great question, and I'm largely of the mindset that goalies will, by and large, a majority of goalies are going to give you roughly league average goaltending. Yeah. Across the course of their career, they'll ultimately end up around league average. Mm-hmm. There are going to be periods of time where they are extremely good, and there are going to be periods of time where they are not so good.
Yeah.
And this is going to happen to basically every goalie that's not an elite goalie. And really right now you can say there's maybe 3 or 4 elite goalies in the NHL.
If that.
So when you're talking about guys like Montembeault, Primo, Allen, whatnot, Jake Allen has had his ups and downs, but his ups have been really good and his downs have been really bad. And I think you're going to see the exact same thing with Montembeault, and potentially this is one of his ups periods.
Yeah.
And at $3.15 million, it's not going to be that much money, particularly as the cap increases over the next couple of years.
He's no John Gibson contract or anything like that.
Right. Yeah. At worst, I think you're going to get league average goaltending over the course of those 3 years.
That's what you want.
He's 27. Taking him to 30. The extension kicks in next year, so taking him to 31. I think you're likely to get roughly league average goaltending over the course of that. But there's going to be high periods and there's going to be low periods. And with with Jake Allen's contract being up after next year, Caden Primo being a restricted free agent after next year.
You did your homework.
Wow. Well, look, if you tell me I'm coming on,
I love this.
A Habs show, I got to know about the Habs, right? So I do my homework here. You got to make sure that you have a plan at least in place where there's some staggering or overlapping, and really, not to add another wrinkle to all of this, but I think you're going to start seeing more teams go to the 3 goalie, rotation. I think what we saw Vegas do last year with 5 different goalies, and ultimately you end up with Adin Hill being the one that takes him to the Stanley Cup. Adin Hill being the exact same type of journeyman goaltender that comes in and wins, all of a sudden gets hot, wins you a Stanley Cup.
I love that.
I see more teams. And we're talking about a Detroit team also.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was saying we're just talking about a Detroit team also that's doing the exact same thing right now, carrying 3 goalies. So that may even be a thing, and you've got to have 3 capable NHL goalies.
I think when someone mentions here Nathan Cunningham in the chat, why were the goalies better back then? I don't know if the elite goalies were better than the elite goalies now, but you had a wider spread, right? So whereas now you have guys that, like the center lines here, you have guys that are slightly below, slightly above. Back then there was a bigger separation between the bad and the good. A lot fewer goalie coaches. A lot of Pee Wee leagues in Canada didn't have coaches, goalie coaches whatsoever, which is why we saw the invasion of the European goalies. They were getting goalie coaches from the get-go, and they were having specific training. Whereas in Quebec, it was like, we have Patrick Roy to spare. Well, we don't anymore. So I think it's just a matter of the market becoming a little more flooded, right, with talent, and the discrepancy in talent is slowly slowly go. And since the Blackhawks won with Niemi, I've been convinced that a goalie is not that important in the NHL. So as you mentioned, a multi-goalie system might start to work out, almost like a rotation in baseball. And the big one here is that you're not destroying their knees. You're not going to Henrik Lundqvist them. You're not going to Carey Price them into submission, right? So load management, I know it's a term that coaches hate, but very important, especially for your goaltender. So I'm with you.
Yeah, even to a certain extent, Derek Lalonde mentioned it on the prior to the Wings game tonight.
Mm-hmm.
One of the advantages of that 3-goalie system is, for example, on a back-to-back, the goalie that you take as a backup for the first game, you're the goalie that you actually want to start the next game stays at home.
They did that with Montembeault last weekend, essentially. Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what the Wings did with Alex Lyon, when he had to come home and play the Blackhawks. The Wings had to play the Rangers in New York and then went back home to play the Blackhawks. They left Alex Lyon at home in Detroit.
Yeah.
They took James Reimer to be the backup for Husso in New York, and then Lyon's fresh and ready to go to start the next game. There's a different mentality to all of that. Ultimately, what I'm getting at is I think you're going to see goalies get treated much more like starting pitchers in baseball, much more load management, much more minutes restriction, much more sort of counts on how many games these guys are playing. Because in the same way we think about pitchers' elbows with Tommy John surgery and whatnot,
knees for the goalies,
you're going to see the same thing with knees and groins in goalies.
And groins. You know what? It is more groins than anything. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Yep.
It's one of the body parts that you can't work out that much, right? So that's where you get so many groin injuries. Nope. Kay mentions, and we're gonna wrap it up just after this, but our favorite person in the chat, we got our favorite guest and our favorite person in the chat, Kay mentioning, I was gonna make your fun fact into a not so fun fact, but the Habs have more goals from D-men than any other team. Absolutely. They have one more goal than the Avs by the defenseman. But right now, the defensemen are scoring about 35% of the Canadiens' goals, whereas the Avs defensemen are scoring about 20% of the Colorado goals. So I think it just goes to show that, Martin Saint-Louis put an onus on joining the rush this year. It's hurting defensively. They're scoring more, but it kind of shines a light on the lack of offense overall. But we saw some encouraging notes tonight. We saw Yoel Armia is just... Armia's back, right? Armia's good to go. We saw Jesse Ylönen, who needs a big promotion. Let's get him going. Jaden Struble as well. So there was some positives, and if anyone didn't have a chance to hear Prashanth at the beginning of the show, I beg you, go back and listen, because he has a very smart, wise approach to it that will probably make you feel a little bit better about what's going on in Montreal. Trizak, Trizak's also the best, my favorite person in the chat. I love you, Trizak. And Goliath Flo, I don't know you that much, but I will eventually love you. And Joe Segredo, we're talking about Garth Snow's equipment. You guys should have all seen the equipment back in the day. Tom Barrasso wore goalie pads that by the second period, they were so soaked with water, they weighed about 55 pounds. So that's the other difference here, is that goalies, the equipment, and no offense to Wayne Gretzky, but they know how to block the lower part of the net. That's been the biggest change with goalies. Okay, Prashanth, where can we find you right now? I put your name on Twitter. You're working on, I know you spoke about the podcast. Can you remind everyone what we're looking for?
Yeah, so you'll find most of the data analysis and work over on Twitter. That Mark will obviously kind of drop my username so that folks can pay attention to. And we had to take a little bit of a hiatus due to Sean Shapiro and I getting quite busy with some family stuff, but we also run the Expected by Whom podcast, which will hopefully be picking back up with a fun former NHL player as a guest. I'll tease that. But really, the
Lyle Odeline. Is it Lyle Odeline? Are you bringing on Lyle Odeline?
It's not Lyle Odeline. No, did not play for Montreal in his career, but not in the league anymore. But functionally, the purpose of the Expected by Whom podcast is to really demystify a lot of what goes into analytics, bringing in the folks that actually created the stuff to talk about it, getting perspectives from NHL executives. We've had a number of assistant GMs, different, directors of analytics. We've had OHL folks on. We've had folks on, from other leagues. And really, it's all about how they're communicating analytics to players and ultimately marrying that with the human side of the game. So kind of interesting take on hockey. We've been on hiatus for the last couple of months. We'll be picking back up soon, though.
I guess you have you mentioned the 2-year-old. You have other stuff you probably should take care of
A little bit.
They want you back. Are you going to come back for the next Red Wings game or what?
Well, you tell me when to come back. I haven't even looked that far ahead in the schedule for the next
I don't
one,
even
but you
know.
tell me.
I live minute to minute. Since the pandemic, time has no meaning to me anymore. So people thought, what are you doing next week? I'm like, next week, that's in 4 months. I honestly, Prashanth, your approach is exactly what we need to bring the data analysis side into an area where everyone understands it. So I really appreciate it. And I'd love to have you back. We're going to talk about this offline, but I think the chat has spoken and they want you for every single Red Wings game. So maybe we'll have to get you on the roster full time. You know what I mean? So, and as Jean mentions, well, I'll say it at the end, but Claire's already gone, so I can't do my classic by Claire. And speaking of not knowing when the next game is, I don't know when Monday maybe? Versus, Seattle. And we have Chanel is going to come on. She was on the show last year. Big Seattle Kraken fan. So she's going to be amazing. Prashanth, thank you so much. Everyone, like the chat, subscribe, and no ad read tonight, Trizak. You're absolutely right. I checked up on it too. That's what I love about my chat. They're always reminding me, like, hey, Marc, you have stuff to do other than just chat. So, merci tout le monde. Je vous apprécie. We'll see you on Monday. And don't forget to jump on Twitter, follow Prashanth, because one of the smartest guys you'll have on your feed. That's it. That's all. Thank you to everybody in the chat. And on va se voir lundi. We will see each other on Monday. Salut!